this becomes a full-time job. It's no different than a football player or a basketball player. If they want to be the best in their sport, it is a 80-hour-a-week job to be number one.
If you're looking for a reality TV show with nasty cars, insane drivers, and extreme races, there's probably no better show to watch than Street Outlaws. As the name implies, Street Outlaws is a show that goes into the world of outlaws who make a living off racing cars on the streets. The exciting thing about the show is that street racing is illegal, so you know that the producers are risking everything to make the show. In essence, Street Outlaws is the most insane racing reality TV show on TV right now. Since the show is based on street racing, it also has some of the most insane crashes that have ever been recorded on any reality show. In this video, we'll be looking at 10 of these crashes and we'll be seeing how they shape the future and form of the show.
I don't know. Who's that? Who's that? Hey, was that Dave?
Clear the starting line! Clear the starting line!
The first crash, and possibly one of the most brutal crashes ever on the show, is the Daddy Dave crash that happened way back in 2015. The crash happened just 2 years after the show began, and it was the first sign that the show needed to take issues of safety seriously. The crash happened on a Saturday evening and occurred when Dave was driving a Chevy 2 with nitrous-filled tires at the Amarillo Dragway in Texas for the No Prep event. A short while after the race started, Dave lost control of his vehicle and found himself crashing into a wall. The crash didn't end there, as the car went on to perform several barrel rolls before coming to a stop. The footage of the crash was so gruesome that it didn't make it to the reality show itself. As the crash happened, bystanders could be heard screaming as the sight was truly horrific. Thankfully, Daddy Dave survived and was immediately taken to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, it was revealed that he had a serious concussion. Thankfully, he made a full recovery. However, he has no recollection of what happened a few hours before the crash and cannot even remember the crash itself. That is how serious the concussion was. The second crash on our list was a bit more recent and happened in 2022. The crash happened when racing spouses JJ DeBoss and Tricia Day were filming America List for the show. During a race, they drove into several rental cars that were brought to the set. The crash was pretty serious, and Tricia suffered serious injuries. She had to spend a week in the hospital. She also had to undergo surgery on both her hips, and the vehicle was totaled in the process. The next crash on our list is that of young superstar driver Brandon James. James's crash occurred in 2021 and was quite serious. The crash happened when the driver was also filming America's List for the show and happened during a race. James was in a race with drag racing star Lizzie Moosey for the show in Nebraska when his car plowed off the road and flipped. The impact not only seriously injured him, but also ruined his Solar Needs racing car, which was a '56 Chevy Bel Air. Thankfully, he was able to walk away from the wreckage alive. He did obtain a few minor injuries, but he suffered nothing serious enough to warrant an extended stay at the hospital. However, there was one drawback. Since he no longer had a car, he had to be replaced in that season with another driver. That is not such an awful thing though, because things could have been worse. Thankfully, the crash had no chance of stopping James from racing. He is one of the youngest drivers on the show, and he says that drag racing is actually in his blood, and if racing is truly in his blood, it's clear that an accident will not stop him. Today, he's back on the tracks, but instead of a '56 Chevy Bel Air, he now works with a '68 twin-turbo Mustang and a '67 Blow Nova. One crash that was so crazy that even the showrunners were genuinely terrified was that of Doc. Throughout Street Outlaws, Doc has built a reputation for being an extraordinary driver, but even very good drivers sometimes run into trouble. In 2020, while filming for the OG show, Doc and his car, the Street Beast, got into a nasty crash. The car barrel rolled 5 to 6 times and even knocked 3 8 to 10 inch round setter trees off the ground. It was almost certainly the most frightening crash to have ever occurred on Street Outlaws, and Doc sustained some pretty grievous injuries from it. In fact, according to people who saw the crash, he was extremely lucky to survive it. Doc himself says he can no longer remember anything from the race and that he was knocked out for about 30 minutes after the crash. His journey back to full recovery was long and arduous, and he had to build another car because his Street Beast was destroyed due to the crash. After the crash, Doc held absolutely nothing back when he started describing his feelings about the rebuilding of his car. He said he was not looking forward to the rebuilding process as COVID had been tough on him and his wallet. But does that mean Doc will not continue racing? Of course not. After the crash, he made it clear that he will be back on our screens with a faster, better, and even stronger vehicle. And since Doc never goes back on a promise, we are certain that is exactly what will happen. Like Doc, Shannon Poole also had an extremely scary incident on the road, and this one was frightening because the car eventually went up in flames. We're pretty sure the footage you are about to see is the scariest thing you'll see all day. If you're a racer, you know that there are 1,001 variables that could affect how a particular race ends. This means that even the most skilled drivers like Poole cannot escape some situations, and these situations could become dangerous quickly. Poole was competing at the Gulfport Dragway's Fat Tuesday Mardi Gras blowout when the unthinkable happened. He was driving his gorgeous 1964 Corvette, which was of course outfitted with nitrous oxide, and many people expected to finish strongly or even win the race. Well, the opposite ended up happening. When Poole started the race, he took off impressively and quickly got a strong lead. But when his vehicle came to a small bump in the road, his car briefly lifted off the ground. However, instead of landing, the car decided to behave like a kite and simply go on and on in the air. And when the car decided to come back to the earth, it did so by crashing nose first into the asphalt and then burst into a flame. While this was happening, his opponent drove past him and won the race. But at this point, this was the least of Poole's worries. By now, his car had taken on a life of its own and was simply just doing its thing and burning brightly. Thankfully, there were men on hand who put out the fire, rolled the car away, and ultimately rescued Poole. Emergency responders were able to make sure Poole was not gravely hurt and also made sure that the fire did not spread. After the crash, forensic investigations revealed that the crash was most likely because of fuel lines in the car being cut on impact. As for Poole, he was conscious after the incident and was able to answer all questions. He showed no signs of major injuries but was still taken to the hospital for a proper checkup. The big question after the crash was this: what happened to his car, and is there a way to stop whatever happened to his car from happening to others? The first theory, and perhaps the accurate one, was that the downforce of the Corvette of the model Poole was riding was simply too much. And that makes sense. If the downforce was not too much, the car would not have landed in that awkward way, and would probably not have burst into flames. Further research has revealed that this is a known issue with racing Corvettes of that model. According to one commentator, the front of the vehicle got light when the car exceeded speeds of about 110 miles per hour. But since Poole is a consummate professional, it's hard to imagine that he was not aware of this problem. But again, racers are not omniscient, and he can have overlooked this possibility, or maybe even knew of it and did not think it would be a huge issue. The last crash for this video is thankfully not that scary. The crash occurred in 2016 when Big Chief sustained a horrific crash during a race in Detroit when the competing vehicle lost control and veered into his lane. Thankfully, he walked away from the accident with very few injuries. He did not even have to go to the hospital afterward. There have been multiple dangerous crashes on the set of Street Outlaws. However, the cast has been lucky enough to always escape with their lives intact after every crash. This just goes to show that racing is a serious business and only professionals should be involved in it.